Bob Weide is a master documentarian. Check out his credits sometime. And don't forget to watch on YouTube his extremely impressive conversation with Woody Allen. Here's Bob.
Hey, Jim.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I am so looking forward to this.
Well, curb your enthusiasm.
There you go. So I'd like to start with the obvious question, which is, how did you and Larry meet?
My first showbiz job was in 1981. I got a job as a, gopher running errands for Rollins and Joffe, who were actually Woody Allen's producers and managers, but they had a West Coast office. So I got a job, doing errands and going to the bank and going to Xerox and getting lunch and getting their cars washed. And soon after that, I produced my first film, which was a documentary on the Marx Brothers for PBS. And then the Rollins Joffe guys asked me to come back after that as their director of development, which I did. And part of my job at that time was reading scripts. I was sort of the first line of defense for all the scripts that came pouring in from writers known and unknown. And I would do coverage and, recommend that we pass or recommend that we meet with the writer or whatever. And now this would have been in 1982, maybe 83. But in any event, a script came across my desk called Prognosis Negative by Larry David. And we knew who Larry was. He wasn't a stranger to us because one of the clients of the company was Michael Richards, who was on Fridays with Larry, of course. And I would occasionally go down to ABC to the tapings of Fridays, just, because we had a client there. And I don't know that I ever chatted with Larry at that time, but in any event, we all knew who he was. So I read the script, Prognosis Negative, and it was one of the funniest scripts I'd ever read, to this day. And so, of course, I recommended to the guys that, we meet with Larry and discuss the script and maybe pursue developing it, producing it. So Larry was called in for these meetings. And the script is very dark. It's basically about a guy who can't commit to relationships in his life. He just, ruins one relationship after another with women. And he finds out that an old girlfriend of his, whom he, was still sort of fond of, and she was attractive, finds out that she's terminally ill, but she doesn't know it. So he gets the news before she does. So it's sort of the best of both worlds, is he figures he gets back together with her and, can have a fun relationship with her, and then what has she got? 6 months and she's out. So, but he can't let on to her that, he knows about this. But in any event, so, it was that kind of character, and it was that kind of a story. And I remember those meetings with Larry where, one of the guys would say, well, this is a very funny script, but, is there anything we can do to make this character, his name was Leo Black, to make this character more likable or more sympathetic? And Larry would sit there and kind of, scratch his chin and think about it, and then just say, no, I don't think so. And I thought, I love this guy, And they never made the film. Nobody ever made the film. It's one of the great unproduced comedies ever. But in any event, from those meetings, Larry's 12 years older than I am, but we connected and we liked each other, and we would hang out a bit afterwards. I'd walk him to his car afterwards. And we started to hang out. We became friends. And he was living in L.A. at the time. He was sort of back and forth between L.A. and New York during the 80s. But he was in L.A. for a stretch, and so we started to hang out, and he would pick me up when he'd have a set to do at the Improv. And I would just go with him, just to hang with him and watch his set, and we'd have dinner together. And I remember he would eat at the Improv because the comics got like 20% off their dinner tab. And he needed that. He needed that 20% because he was broke and unemployable. So I would always watch him perform. And then, he moved back to New York at one point, and, I was traveling to New York with some frequency at the time, so we'd hang in New York, and once again, I'd go with him to see him perform. And that was how we became friends.
So when he decided that he was going to do this documentary for HBO, Did he reach out to you beforehand and ask you, do you think this is a good idea? Or did he say to you, I'm thinking about doing this, would you like to direct it? What was the sequencing there?
Well, I'll say this, the ellipsis at the end of my last story is, history. It's Seinfeld and the series and all that. So Larry and I remained in touch throughout all of that. I mean, I saw less of him during the Seinfeld years than I did before because he was now employed. And but we still would see each other occasionally. I remember some lunches in the very early days of Seinfeld when, he was already struggling with whether or not he should stay or if he should hightail it. He'd ask me my advice. Because I was such a fan of Prognosis Negative, he continued to send me things that he was writing. And after he left Seinfeld, he wrote a script which he sent to me just, for my input. And I thought it was okay, but I didn't think it was great. And I told him that. And I think he appreciated that because I have a feeling a lot of people aren't that honest with Larry or weren't in that context. And in any event, I really thought that after I had this conversation with him, I mean, I didn't hate the script. I just thought that he, was capable of something better than that. I really thought, I may not hear from this guy again because, I didn't tell him that I thought the script was great. But somehow he went the other way, and like 2 weeks later, and I remember now, this was October of 98, so almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago anyway. In October of 98, I got this call from him, and I also think we had just had lunch recently. And in any event, he said, listen, I've got this idea of doing some kind of a 1-hour special for HBO. And it's a very loose idea, but I want to shoot it sort of documentary style, and I'm thinking that the dialogue should be improvised rather than scripted. But it would be about me going back to do stand-up. I mean, I would play myself, and, the story is basically that I'm going to go back to do stand-up, and I have an HBO special pending, but I don't want to do it. But we'd actually go into the clubs, and I would actually perform and do sets. And he asked me if I wanted to develop the idea with him and work on it and then direct it if it got made. Now, from the time before I met Larry, going back to 1982, I had made a number of these comedy documentaries on, comedy legends like the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields, and I guess I was still working on my Lenny Bruce documentary. I did one on Mort Saul. So he figured, aside from the fact that we were friends, that we had, before Seinfeld, talked about maybe doing something together, that we shared a sense of humor, that we got along. And then there was the added bonus that I made actual comedy documentaries. He thought maybe I could make a fake one look pretty real. So I just said, yeah, of course I'm interested. What do you want to do? And he said, well, let's, come by my office, tomorrow or next week or whatever it is, and let's just sort of figure this out. Let's flesh it out a little bit and see what we got. And of course, he was always giving me the caveat that at the end of the day, if he thought we didn't have anything, he wasn't going to do it. He wasn't obligated to do something for HBO. There wasn't a deal yet. Or if there was, he was happy to walk away from it. But so he was always telling me that if this doesn't work out, if the idea stinks, we won't do it. So he had an office in Santa Monica at the time, and I went, and we got behind a closed door and started to flesh out, I should say, this idea, and actually work on the specific story outline and what would happen. And I remember it was my idea to film actual interviews for the special, just to make it look as much like a real documentary as possible. In other words, if I were doing a documentary on Larry David going back to stand-up comedy, a real one, what would I do? Who would I talk to? And made a list of possible interview subjects. I remember suggesting that maybe I would talk to his mom and dad, and he overruled that idea right away. He said, no, it's okay. Let's leave them out of this.
Was there any kind of eventful moment during the making of the HBO special, the documentary that you can remember?
Well, because we hadn't done this before, we were really finding our way as we were going. And, there were no rules to follow or to break. We were just really flying by the seat of our pants. And I remember we had a scene at LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. Now, this was before 9/11. And I know that after 9/11, there was a period where you couldn't come near an airport with a camera crew. But we, advised them of what we were doing and got all the permits and permissions to shoot. I forget what airline it was, but basically in one of the terminals. And the scene was the one where Larry fails to go to the memorial service for the stepfather of an acquaintance of his. And he makes up some BS to get out of it. But then lo and behold, of course, as can only happen to Larry, once he's at the airport, he runs into the sky and finds himself having to apologize for skipping the service. And the guy's very hurt, and Larry doesn't know quite what to say or what to do. Anyway, it escalates into a bit of a tiff, a typical curb tiff. But we did and again, because none of this is scripted. Excuse me. And again, because none of this is scripted, you don't know where it's going to go from take to take, and takes can be wildly different in any event. One take became a little bit more of an argument than the other ones had. And in fact, it got very nasty. And there was one moment where Larry and this other actor really started shouting at each other. Now remember, we're in an actual airport, and all the people walking around are not extras. They're actual customers, people flying on the airport. And suddenly there's some guy screaming like a madman in the airport, that madman being Larry, of course. And, finally I called cut, and I was a little nervous about it because I could tell people were alarmed and people were standing looking like, what the hell is going on here? And sure enough, the officials at LAX were not happy about this at all. And we got phone calls and letters from them saying, you've got to make this right somehow. They weren't threatening to charge us or fine us or anything, but clearly somebody had to write a letter or get on the phone with them and offer a major apology, and that person wound up being me. As I recall, there was both a phone call and a letter. They were genuinely unhappy about it because they were, I guess on their end, they were afraid of lawsuits or something, or that somebody could really make trouble for them for some kind of whatever the legal term is, some kind of stress and anxiety, and they were very serious about this. And I remember just really having to compose a letter to get them off our backs because there were some veiled threats as to them taking some sort of action against us. Finally, it blew over, but that was sort of our first lesson, that if you're going to be out in public where there are people who are not signed on to appear in your program, you've got to kind of watch your step and not alarm anybody too much.
Hey, let me ask you a question in terms of, when you said lessons or rules. It seems that in the series, there was a rule that famous people would not be allowed to come on the show and play
Right.
anyone other than themselves.
Right.
But lo and behold, Ed Asner was there, but he wasn't playing Ed Asner. So how did you make the exception for him?
Yeah, he was sort of the Jackie Robinson of actors, not playing themselves on our show. He was the first. But yes, that was the rule. Now, in season one, early on in the season, Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen played themselves, of course. And that was okay. That was all about just trying to maintain the verisimilitude to make this feel, like a documentary, like a day in the life of Larry David. So if you had an actor who came on, as somebody else, you would just be thinking, well, wait a minute, that's not Shirley. That's, of course, I can't think of any name of anybody right now.
That's Mary Steenburgen.
Yes. So, but Mary Steenburgen could come on and play herself. So that was the rule for a while. And there were, it's funny. The season one, there were a couple times where we tried to get actors to do cameos, playing themselves. I remember we went after Dustin Hoffman to play himself. We just needed an actor of some notoriety to play themselves on the show. I think we went after Hoffman. We went after Warren Beatty, people who Larry had some sort of vicarious connection with, or knew somebody who knew somebody. And we could not get anybody to come on the show because nobody knew what it was. People were afraid of the improv element, and they were nervous about doing it. Plus, again, Larry was just known as the writer of Seinfeld, the co-creator of Seinfeld, but nobody knew what Curb Your Enthusiasm was. We were so under the radar. So we really couldn't get anybody. Ted and Mary did that first season. We may have had a couple of other cameos. I don't know. But, by the time the second season was up, we had a long, long queue of people, of actors and celebrities who really wanted to be on the show. And, the show didn't really work that way. Occasionally we found things for people to do. We had heard that Nathan Lane was a big fan of the show. I think we heard from his agent saying that he really would love to do something on Curb. And then lo and behold, season 4, we had our producers arc where Larry was going to be in the producers. We thought, well, there's got to be something for Nathan Lane to do here. So within a montage, we had a little scene in which Nathan Lane had a cameo playing himself. But we could not get celebrities for that first season. Nobody wanted to do it. Eventually we just eased that rule. There was a part of an attorney. No, let me take that back. There was, I forget the part. I know he played, the father of the guy. Right, okay. So we had an episode where Larry goes into a deli, and there's a guy working at the deli who Larry used to know, who used to be a writer, and now he's fallen on hard times. And I think the plot line was that his father wasn't going to leave him any money when he died, that his father had sort of ostracized him. But in any event, we auditioned actors for the father, and it must have been our casting director who said, what about Ed Asner? And we thought, well, we don't really use known actors playing other people. But we said, well, what the hell, have him come in and audition. And he did a great audition. We said, all right, so Ed Asner is going to play somebody other than himself. And that was the first. That was the first. We didn't do a lot of that on Curb, at least not when I was there for the first 5 seasons, but we did some. And now it's really done more and more. Again, a lot of it is just because there are a lot of known actors who really want to do the show. And if they're great for the part, they get hired regardless of whether or not, people know who they are.
Are you ready to make your next move? Well, Squarespace wants to be with you when you do. Squarespace gives people a powerful and beautiful online platform from which to make their next move known to the world. With Squarespace, people can lock down their ideas with a unique domain, create a website to launch their idea, a portfolio to get their project out there, and an online store to officially open for business. There's so much that Squarespace can do for you. So what are you waiting for? Make your next move with Squarespace. Create a beautiful website or online store with award-winning templates. There's nothing to install, patch, or upgrade, ever. And Squarespace offers award-winning 24/7 customer support with fully transparent and simple to execute setup. Squarespace is used by a wide range of creatives, people, and businesses. Use offer code ORIGINS for 10% off your first purchase of a website and domain. That's offer code ORIGINS. And make your next move with Squarespace. Can I ask you a couple of casting questions? Because, first and foremost, I can't wait to hear about what it was like when J.B. Smoove came in to read for the part of Leon. Were you in the room?
Yes, I was. In fact, after season 5, for the first 5 seasons, I was the principal director. I directed 5 or 6 out of the 10 every season, and then I left after 5 to pursue other things, and since then I've come back and I'll direct 1 episode per season. So JB first appeared during season 6, which was my first season not on the show full time. But it just so happened that the episode I directed for season 6 was episode number 2, which was JB's first appearance on the show. So, yes, I was there during his audition. And it was one of those auditions where somebody just walks in and, all right, well, that's the end of casting. We've got the guy. He was so funny. He came in with his character of Leon just fully formed. I mean, I was going to say if you film the audition, the fact is it does exist on tape somewhere because we did tape the auditions, but it had the feel, it had the rhythm of those great scenes of Larry and Leon that, people love so much. Other than the fact that Larry was laughing all through it. I mean, Larry couldn't control himself. This guy was so funny, and the way he'd look at Larry quizzically, like he was wondering what the hell Larry was talking about. And, Larry is just famous for breaking up. I mean, there are times that we went over schedule during any given day just because we had to make time for Larry to, control himself and maintain himself. And it was sometimes really difficult. I mean, there would be a 10-minute stretch in which Larry just could not get through a scene. And occasionally that happens during an audition. And the audition for JB was like that because JB was just so funny and really cracked Larry up in the room. And when he left, it was one of those auditions where we looked at each other and said, all right, well, we've got our Leon. there's no point in even looking at anyone else. He was just so funny. But, there was no telling at that time. I mean, there's no telling at that time. I mean, there was an arc worked out for JB's character Leon to continue through that season, but there was no knowing at that time that he would be such a popular character on the show that he would just be kept, long after the story of the Black family living in the house was gone and Vivica Fox and everybody else left. There was no knowing at that time that Leon would stay on. Because, I mean, there's just nothing funnier than Leon and Larry together. So he's become a regular member of the cast and has stayed on for all the seasons subsequent to 6. But, you just knew during that audition that scenes with Larry and Leon were going to be something very special. Oh, well, once he, was able to, sort of recover from all the laughing, it was one of those things where we all looked at each other and just laughed and said, that's our guy. I mean, I don't remember precisely what he said, but it was understood amongst us and our casting director that we found our guy.
Right. And what about Cheryl?
Well, finding Larry's wife, now, of course, Cheryl goes back to the original special in 99. And we saw a lot of actresses for that part. In fact, I remember Nia Vardalos came in. I'm sure if I looked at the tape now, I'd see a lot of other recognizable names or people who've become known since then. This was before my Big Fat Greek Wedding, so I don't think Larry and I knew who Nia was. Jeff Garland would have known, but anyway, we saw a lot of actresses, and no one was quite nailing it. I remember the premise for the audition was not something that was in the show, but just something that Larry came up with as a means to sort of, explore the dynamic with any given actress. And there were two bits. One was Larry's with his wife and it's breakfast time, and they're having cereal, and his wife pours way too much milk into the cereal bowl. And Larry basically says, why all the milk? I mean, you want the milk level to be level with the cereal. Why do you go past the cereal level and add all that much milk? Are you going to drink the milk after the cereal? Just as a means of getting into one of those little petty arguments. And then the other premise was Larry would ask, what's for dinner? And his wife would say, I'm making chicken for dinner. And Larry would say, I thought we had a discussion that I was off chicken. I'm not eating chicken. And again, just to see where it went from there. So actresses would come in, and very often one of two things would happen, is they would either get too angry, and it would turn into too much of a sort of cacophonous argument, or would sort of spin out of control too fast, or the actress playing the wife would just start to get really hurt, almost like she was going to cry. And that's not great for comedy. I mean, for this show, you don't want Larry to really be bullying his wife. So we were looking for somebody who would sort of play it down the middle and would just sort of, give him back a little bit of what he was giving, and just sort of keep it at the moderate tiff level, but just have it be funny. So we saw so many actresses, and nobody was really nailing it. And then I got an invitation one night for an actors showcase. Basically, it was an agent who was putting up a bunch of his actors, all comedic actors, of a night where they all did, little sketches, little 4 or 5 minute bits. And I said, I'll just go to this. Who knows? Maybe somebody interesting will be there. And we were going to be shooting before long, and we really needed to cast this role. So I went, and lo and behold, one of the actresses was Cheryl Hines, who was unknown to all of us. I don't know what her credits were at that time, nothing substantial at all. And, she was younger than Larry, but not so young that it looked ridiculous that she'd be married to Larry. But I remember the bit that she did to this day. It was really funny. It was some sort of employee training meeting where they had some sort of guy advising about what to do in a disaster, at the workplace. And I remember, so the question is, he would say, okay, so there's been an earthquake and the water is cut off. There's no running water in your office and you can't escape. You're thirsty. What do you do? And Cheryl raises her hand and pipes up and she says, well, I suppose if push came to shove, you could drink your own urine. And the room just goes real quiet, and everybody stares at her, and the guy stares at her, and he says, well, okay, I was thinking more about having water stored in the room in advance, or, possibly detaching a hose from the back of the refrigerator and drinking the water that way. And Cheryl goes, oh, well, yeah. And then I remember the line that really killed me. She said, well, I did say if push came to shove. And that was it. I just said, this girl's really, really funny. And that line, I did say if push came to shove, gave Cheryl a career. I approached the agent afterwards. I said, I'm really interested in this Cheryl Hines. Can she come in tomorrow for an audition for this thing we're doing with Larry David? Back then, you had to explain who he was. Larry David, the co-creator of Seinfeld. We're doing a 1-hour HBO special. We're looking for somebody to play his wife. Can she come? And she did. And she came in and she did the audition. We did the cereal bit. We did the chicken bit. And she played it just right down the middle. She gave him a bit of his own medicine, and it was sarcastic, but it was funny and playful, and you really got that they were a loving couple having a silly little tiff. And that was it. And now, again, we cast her in the special, having no idea at the time there'd be a series. And we just thought we'd do this 1-hour special and say goodbye to Cheryl, and then lo and behold, we had a series, and Cheryl had quite a nice career out of that.
I would say so.
Yeah.
It is amazing, though, because it's such a delicate dance that they do, because you have to figure out and explain to the audience why she continues to be with him, show the kind of foundational love that they have for each other, so to speak. So then all that other stuff on top of it, when she stands up to him,
right,
still plays out. It's like it's very. I think it's harder to do than one might assume at the beginning.
Yeah, and that's why the dynamic. We just wanted to get that dynamic right during that audition, and a lot of the other women were very funny, but yeah, you just needed somebody who sort of had the right balance with him, and she did. Yeah, it's interesting because when we were doing the series, I guess their split up came at the end of 6. And then it was sort of on again and off again, and 7 was in part about Larry trying to win Cheryl back and casting her in the Seinfeld reunion and all that. But I remember as important as Cheryl was to the show, and as much as we all loved her, both on and off camera. I mean, she was with a room full of sort of dark, morose Jews. Cheryl was our little, piece of sunshine coming to work every day with a big smile on her face, and very happy. And my nickname for her was Sunshine. Here comes Sunshine. But in any event, one thing that I remember Larry sort of bemoaning was, the problem is I can't do stories about me, trying to date women and striking out with women. It'd be fun to do some stuff of me clumsily trying to flirt and bad dates or whatever, but, being married on the show, I can't do that. So in season 4, he came up with the business about their 10-year anniversary and the flashback in which we learned that Cheryl had told Larry that if they made it to 10 years, he'd be allowed to have one fling. So that was our excuse during season 4 to have some of those scenes of Larry trying to pick up women and striking out, and ending with the scene with Katie Huffman backstage at the producers, and it looks like he's going to score, and she's got a picture of Bush on her nightstand, and he realizes that she's a Republican, and he can't go through it.
Oh yeah, that was
can't go through with it.
That was
but
that was
so
special.
that allowed us to have a taste of that, and then once Larry and Cheryl split, now there's all kinds of shows about dating and girlfriends who come and go and that kind of thing. But it worked out well for Cheryl. I mean, first of all, Cheryl has always maintained a presence on the show, even in the upcoming season 9. She does appear, and there's been no lack of work for her. She's worked constantly and has had a number of series and features and all that. So she's still very much a part of the Curb family.
How about Shelley Berman? Because I think some people of a certain age remember him for his comedic genius, but the man who played Larry's father, what was it like approaching and casting him?
Well, first of all, those of us on the show, myself, Larry Garland, Larry Charles, and some of the other directors, Brian Gordon, all huge fans of Shelley's. I mean, I was a kid when he was doing stand-up, but every family had that record, Inside Shelley Berman. I mean, it was so popular. So I remember hearing that growing up, and of course he was on the Ed Sullivan Show and all of that. So he was a huge deal. He was a big deal in the 60s. In fact, his album Inside Shelley Berman was the first comedy record to go gold, which I think means either selling 1 million copies or $1 million worth of sales. But in any event, he was really a big deal. So when we were casting for Larry's father, we actually had quite a few of those comedians from that generation coming in. I remember Shecky Green did a very good audition. But Shelley came in and was just fantastic. And the scene he auditioned with was a scene from his first episode, which was the special section, in which Larry's mother dies while he's in New York, and nobody bothers to tell him.
And she didn't want us to bother you.
Yeah, she didn't want you to. She wanted you to have a good time. So that was the scene. That was the audition scene, and Shelley came in. Now, here's something about Shelley is when Shelley was younger, he had a head of hair, which many people have when they're younger, and then the hair went away, so he bought some hair and has had this toupee plastered on his head for the last several decades. And it's a nice toupee. There's nothing wrong with it, but you never saw Shelley without the wig, without the toupee. So he came in and did this great audition. He does the scene, and she didn't want to bother you, and he was just hysterical. He was perfect. And again, he walks out of the room. We look at each other, and it's like, well, he's great. But we all were wondering, we wanted his dad, especially with Larry's hairline, which is non-existent. We wanted Shelley to be bald as well. So Larry said, I wonder if he'd work without the piece. And so somebody said, perhaps me, said, why don't you ask him? So we were so certain we wanted to cast him. I mean, again, one of those auditions where we said, all right, he's perfect. And also just the idea of having Shelley Berman on the show really tickled us. So I remember Larry leaving the room, I didn't witness this, but he told us about it when he came back. He ran down the hallway. He caught up with Shelley. He said, Shelley, that was great. We love you. We really want you to do the show. I just have one question for you. And Shelley said, you want to know if I'll work without the piece? And Larry said, yeah, as a matter of fact. Would you? And Shelley says, well, if you're going to put me on the show, yeah, sure. And he did it. And it was like the first time in a long time, first time ever, I suppose, that Shelley did anything professionally without wearing the toupee. And the funny thing is, people knew him as having the toupee, and then people saw him without the toupee, and then he became recognizable for not having the toupee. And, I remember talking to him once. I said, well, now when you're out in public, if you wear the hair, everybody's going to know it's a wig because they've seen you without it. I said, you should just tell people that you shave your head for the show. But in any event.
That's great.
Yeah, it was just a delight to have him on the show. He was always funny.
Here's an odd question. Can you tell me about cars on the show?
Yeah, it's funny. Again, when we were doing season 1, this was not a typical show, typical sort of network show where everything is planned in advance. We would show up. Listen, I've made 3 cameos in the show, 2 of them in which I had speaking roles. And that was all because on the day we were shooting, and then we'd come up with a bit for Larry to do, and Larry would say something like, what would be great is if somebody were walking down the street, and if I gave them my phone and asked them to call Lewis's house because I don't want to talk to his girlfriend. But, it wasn't something that we had cast because we didn't think of it until, on the day, on the spot. So Larry would say to me, well, you do it. Just walk down and you and I can do it. So that's why I've appeared in the show 3 times. So this is pretty atypical as far as having everything planned in advance. And I remember, we sort of had our first scene coming up with Larry driving in a car. So there was talk about what kind of car he would drive. I think Larry at the time drove a Lexus, if I'm not mistaken. But I remember suggesting that we get a convertible because it would be easier to shoot in. Because to bring cameras and lights inside a car, and sometimes 2 cameras plus a director and a monitor, it was impossible. I thought if we had a convertible, at least we could have things popping out the top and all that. I remember Larry just disposing of that idea very quickly. He said, what, did I look like the kind of schmuck who would drive around in a convertible? I wouldn't drive a convertible. It's like, okay, well, there goes that. So we just used a Lexus, and it may have been Larry's own car. I don't know. But after season 1, I remember I was with Larry, and he said, hey, let's go down to the Toyota dealership. I'm going to look at this new car they have, and it's a hybrid. It's like part electric, part, combustion engine. Gets really good mileage. I said, okay. So we went down to the Toyota dealership, and we looked at this car. It was called a Prius, and you hadn't seen any of these out and about yet. I mean, it was brand new, and somehow it must have been through Larry's wife, who's a big environmentalist. He was tipped off about these cars. So we went and looked at it, and I remember the guy opened up the hood, and we looked inside, and I just said, well, there's the future. We're looking at the future. I mean, why not? This makes perfect sense. So Larry bought a Prius, which is a pretty small car. And then I was horrified when he announced that he wanted to use the Prius for his car on the show, meaning that now we had to put lights and cameras and people in the back seat of this tiny little car, which was not fun, but we did it. And I remember people watching season 2 of the series and saying, what the hell kind of car is that? What is he driving? And the people at the Toyota dealership told us that a lot of people were coming in saying they wanted to look at the Larry David car, meaning the Prius. And soon after that, you saw Priuses all over. So I've always thought that the show played a little bit of a part in putting Prius on the map.
It was great. It was great. Well, listen, I see now I feel guilty because I said, do you have another 15 minutes? And I've done double that.
No, it was me going on with my side.
No.
Let me give you one other thing that you may find interesting. And this will be quick. This sort of relates to, again, the idea that very little was planned in advance. But, in the original special, the 1 hour special, people forget this, and then it's kind of a shock if they go back and look at it, is that Larry and Cheryl have kids in the special. We never see them, but they're referenced a few times. The kids, where are the kids? They're at my mom's place or whatever. So when we were going to do the series, I was asking Larry well in advance, are you going to have kids on the show? Because if so, we're going to have to cast kids, and, they can only work for so many hours, and it's kind of a pain, but, you had kids on the special. I suppose we will have them in the series. He says, I don't know, let me think about it. He kept putting it off, let me think about it. And then we were getting ready to shoot the first episode, the Pants Tent of season 1. And the first scene takes place in Larry's house, and back then we shot all the scenes in sequential order as they appeared in the final show. So I remember asking Larry, look, we're shooting tomorrow. We better figure out this kids thing. And he said, well, I don't know, maybe they're at camp or something. Can't we delay it a little bit? I said, well, you're cutting it awfully close. So the next day, actually it would have been evening because it was a night scene. We're literally on the set getting ready to shoot, and I said to Larry, look, we've got to decide about the kids. Do you have kids? We're about to shoot the first scene. Larry said, well, why can't we just assume they're somewhere else? And I said, because we're shooting in the kitchen, and if you have kids, there's going to be kid stuff on the refrigerator door. You're going to have drawings. They're going to be held up with those dopey little magnets of letters from the alphabet or whatever. So it's now become a question of set decoration. This is going to look like a very different set if you have kids versus you don't have kids. So I said, you really need to make a decision. And Larry thought about it and sort of scratched his chin and said, no, we don't have kids. And that's how that decision was made. It was about whether or not we'd put something on the refrigerator that led to them not having kids on the show.
Oh, that is great.
So that's how those kinds of decisions tend to be.
Can you imagine if it's a network show? I mean, there'd be like, there'd be like test audiences. Then there'd be like, well, we just, so-and-so's daughter is available. We got to get them in for castings. I mean, it
would have been a totally different scene. I mean, there's a lot of the reason the show was so good is just pure and simple Larry's genius. But a lot of it was also HBO really leaving us alone. I mean, HBO being smart enough to know that they're not going to start to give Larry notes about how to make a show funny, because Larry would laugh at them and walk away and say, well, if you guys know how to make a funny show, you go ahead and make one. Make it without me. So they've really left us alone. And we never could have gotten away with that on any sort of network show. I remember friends of mine who were running very successful network comedies. Once Curb came on the air and was known, people would ask me about how we worked and what the relationship was with HBO, and I'd say, they totally leave us alone. They're not on set. They don't give us notes. They have no involvement in casting. They're not in the editing room. They don't see cuts. And these friends of mine who ran network shows would just start to drool at the prospect of having the network leave them alone, because that's not how it works in the real world. But again, we were in an anomaly, and I think that has a lot to do with the show being able to sort of to be what it was, as nobody was telling us to do something different.
Parachute sheets are the softest and most comfortable sheets you'll ever own. And why is that? Well, simply put, it's because they're made from the very best fabrics. Parachute sheets have a clean, minimalistic style that come in neutral colors, so they work perfect in any bedroom. And the best part of Parachute is that their sheets get softer with time. Plus, if you're a person who wants to make an impact on the world, and frankly, who doesn't, then Parachute is the company for you. They've partnered with the United Nations Foundation to donate malaria prevention bed nets, and they've already donated 16,000 so far. Here's another great part of the story. Parachute offers a 60-night trial, so if you don't love your sheets, you just send them back, no questions asked. Now, if you're wondering how that makes a positive impact on the world, well, all returns are donated to Habitat for Humanity, and that's a great cause. So don't wait. Visit parachutehome.com/origins for free shipping and returns. Again, that's parachutehome.com/origins for free shipping and returns. It doesn't get any easier. It's time to get better sleep with Parachute. Let me ask you a question. I don't mean to digress here for a second,
sure.
but given your knowledge of history and your affection for the comedic days of yore, during your friendship with Larry, was the more traditional comedic roots, was that something you guys would talk about a lot? Because if you trace the pedigree of Larry's own comedic education, I've heard at times that it's a little bit unorthodox and different than, let's say, I don't mean to put myself in your category of level of experience or achievement, but than people like us.
Yeah, not only is it unorthodox, I'm not certain that it even exists. I mean, the short answer to your question is no. We never had those discussions. And, the more detailed answer is that I was always surprised at Larry's lack of knowledge of sort of the golden years of comedy, movie comedy, or whatever else. I mean, my bread and butter were the great film comedians of the silent era in the 30s, and I remember taking Larry one night, or we met there. We went to a screening of a Harold Lloyd movie at UCLA, and he admitted to me that he had never seen a silent film before. I said, "Is that possible? Can that be?" He said, "Yeah." So we saw it afterwards, and he loved it. He thought it was brilliant. He really laughed loudly during the movie, and afterwards said, "God, I had no idea that silent films were that funny." And I said, "Yeah, well, there's a reason why Chaplin and Keaton and Lloyd and those guys are still so fondly remembered." I remember he told me he had never watched a Marx Brothers movie from beginning to end. He had maybe seen scenes here and there on TV, or a W.C. Fields movie. I remember he didn't know that Laurel and Hardy had even made silent films.
That just seems so crazy, but at the same time, it just begs the question, which is, how did he come to develop his comedic chops? Are we talking then about somebody whose personality was such a driving force in their finding their way comedically that they didn't need the kind of exposure and affection for traditions like others did?
Well, I guess he is sort of a self-made man in that regard. I mean, his point of view is certainly his own. Now, there are people that he loves. There are comics that he loves. He'll always refer back to Phil Silvers and the Bilko series, so he loved that. He's referenced Abbott and Costello, although the TV series, not the movies.
Car 54, where are you?
I don't remember speaking about that specifically. Yeah, but sort of that era of television that he grew up on. I mean, by the time I came of age or Larry came of age, those films from the 30s obviously were ancient history, so you had to seek them out. Go to revival houses, or if they're on TV, I got my TV guide every week, and I took a yellow highlighting marker, and anytime there was an old comedy on, I would mark it and set the alarm to see it. But Larry saw what was current to him growing up, I imagine. Again, he precedes me by a dozen years, so what he would have seen on TV was a little different than me, although with some crossover. But yeah, I'm sure all those kind of Nat Hiken films, I mean TV series and that sort of thing, he probably liked. And he's a great admirer of Woody Allen's, of course. In my Woody Allen documentary, Larry's an interview subject, not just because he appeared in one of Woody's movies, but as one of those guys who grew up loving him. I mean, he saw Take the Money and Run in 1969, and he said, "Wow, that was it for him." He just related to this guy so much. And of course, they're both from Brooklyn, although Woody is Midwood and Larry is Sheepshead Bay. But a lot of in the Venn diagram of their respective lives, there's a lot of crossover in the middle.
Right.
With those families and those apartment buildings with the thin walls, and hearing not only your parents scream at each other all the time, but the neighbors screaming at each other all the time. And both very athletic. Woody was a big stickball player and basketball player, and Larry was athletic too. And Jewish kids from that part of New York. Now they're a dozen years apart as well, but with a lot in common. So he loved Woody. But no, as far as sort of the class. And, I haven't had a lot of conversations with him about stand-ups he would have admired that preceded him. I'm not certain what his take is on, Lenny Bruce or, but, Larry's voice is so different. I think he would have gone a different way anyway. I don't know about, Jackie Mason or any of the sort of professional Jew comics.
Right.
But, no, it did not enter into our conversation much at all.
Did the word series, potential series, kind of scream at you at any point during the shooting?
No, I vaguely thought of the possibilities. One of the reasons, I would have done this special under any circumstances because the opportunity to work with Larry was just, kind of thrilling. But one of the enticements for me is we thought that this would be something that would just take 3 months and then we both get on with our lives. And I like that because I get bored quickly and I like to move on, and I had other things on my plate that I wanted to take care of. So Larry really minimized the sort of time commitment and said, how long would it take? I'll do a few shows and we'll do some filming, and we'll be finished with this in a few months, and no one will watch it, and that'll be that. And the actual filming was a very on and off again proposition over a period of several months. Like maybe 7 or 8. And I remember, but it was a completely undisciplined production and sort of a non-existent schedule. We'd shoot for a few days, and then 2 weeks would go by, and Larry would say, "Hey, let's shoot some more." Or Larry would call me up and say, "I'm going to do this gig at this place on Wednesday. Why don't we shoot that?" It was very, very loosey-goosey, and so the shooting really went on for months. I remember there was one point where Larry was thinking of having some knee surgery or something. He was also thinking about having LASIK surgery, and there was talk about what that would do to the schedule. And, we'd have to wait, 2 months before we could go on. So it was like that. We had a line producer for the special named Mark Farrell who was very tolerant of all that stuff and managed to deal with it. But in any event, from the time Larry called me in October of 98, it was a year before we had a finished thing that went on the air, because I remember it aired in October of 99. And I remember somewhere in there, because we were having a good time, it was just a fun show to make, I remember saying to Larry, I said, and there was nothing premeditated about this, it was strictly just, mild curiosity. I said to him, so if there was an opportunity to do a series based on this, do this as a regular thing, would you do it? And he thought about it like, yeah, maybe. And that was it. That was the only conversation we had about the idea of it being a series.
When
that simple.
So when you heard that HBO wanted it and he was willing to do it, he approached you about directing what would be the first episode of the first season.
Yeah, the idea was that I would ostensibly be the principal director. In fact, during the time I was there as a producer and the principal director, during any given season of 10 episodes, I would direct 5. And then, during the early days of the series, the first season or two, when other people were being brought in to do their one episode, if it was Larry Charles or Brian Gordon, or I remember Andy Ackerman did one early on, David Steinberg, I would be there to sort of, show them how we did it, to sort of orient them to the way we'd shoot.
So can you just, for a second, give us an understanding of just how odd a duck this is? Obviously, we're not dealing with a 3-camera sitcom on a stage in front of a live audience. We're not dealing with the prepared script. What that means for you as the director?
Well, to me, there was no kind of precedent to rebel against or anything, because I had never done this before. I had never imagined any kind of career in series television for myself. I never wanted one. As a matter of fact, when Larry called me up, I remember I was at a documentary film festival in Hot Springs, Arkansas, showing my Lenny Bruce film, which was brand new at the time. And I got that call from Larry saying HBO was interested in a series, and what did I think? And my first question was, how many episodes do they want? Meaning, I don't really want to work that hard. And Larry said, well, they want 13, but I think I can talk them down to 10, which is the opposite way that any, executive producer in this town would normally go. And I said, well, if you talk them down to 10, I'm in. Do it for a season. We'll do 5. They'll cancel us because no one will watch. But in any event, so I never pursued a career in series television. So I didn't really, as a producer, as the director, I didn't really have any precedence to think about. We were, as far as I was concerned, we were making it up as we went along. Now, the outline for the special, for the 1 hour special, which Larry and I created in his room, and I may have even typed it up, was only a page and change. It was like maybe a page and a half for the entire hour. So in other words, every scene was really just a line or two. Once we started to put together the outline for the series, it was a little longer. I think for season 1, those episode outlines were maybe 5 pages with pretty wide margins. And we really sort of stuck to the same principles as we did for the special. I mean, my feeling for the special was, it's not like we were purposely trying to fool anybody, but my feeling was if somebody tuned into this thing and didn't know that wasn't Larry's wife, because Larry's wife is Lori David, and didn't know that wasn't Larry's manager, because his manager was Gavin Pallone, that you could watch it and absolutely buy it as being real and think you were watching a real documentary. So that informed, it certainly informed the performances, and I think the improvised dialogue certainly helped in that regard. But it also informed the way I would shoot it. In other words, if Larry is walking down the street and then enters a building, the camera would follow him in rather than already be in the building and sort of preset anticipating him walking in, because in a real documentary, you're literally following your subject. Now, those rules sort of were relaxed over time. I think even before the end of the first episode, there were a couple of sequences that we did that were more stylistic, and now it's basically shot like a conventional single camera show. It's still handheld, but
Bob, in terms of coverage, though, because there isn't a script and you don't know how people are going to react, is there a greater burden for you to make sure that you're covering all bases, so to speak, because you might get a reaction from somebody that you're going to want in editing?
Right. Well, for the special, it was single camera. And then there was sort of this last-minute idea of let's get a second camera just so we can always have a camera on Larry and we won't miss anything. So the idea of having a second camera for the special was such a last-minute idea that we just ran out and bought like a little, $300, this is before HD, a little $300 palm quarter to use as a second camera, thinking that just in case we really need it. We wound up using it so much, we wound up relying on it so much in the editing room that we not only had to sort of upgrade this little camera, the quality, the video quality, as much as possible, we actually downgraded the video from the A camera so they would meet somewhere in the middle. And so we realized once we started doing the series that we should always have 2 cameras. And yeah, the idea was, as far as I was concerned, was to almost always have a camera on Larry, and then the second camera would either get some sort of a master, or if it was a dialogue between him and Susie or Jeff or whatever, that the second camera would get them. But yeah, the key was not to miss anything that you weren't going to be able to repeat again and have it still have the same feel of spontaneity. Because if something happened that was unexpected and it got a laugh, you knew that if you tried to hit it again the same way, you weren't quite going to capture the magic of the first one. So that was sort of the key, was just to try not to miss anything. And then, once you've got the basic scene down, then you come around and you get whatever, singles or overs or 2 shots, you can get coverage, knowing that it's just really for the editing room so that you can make the scene work, but that the content is pretty much there. When
you were doing the first episode, did you, with family or friends or something, well, yeah, we're doing this episode of this new show, and the first episode's about this guy and people think he's got an erection?
Yeah, no, I never, I never really had conversations with people about what I was doing.
Right.
I didn't think of it that way. It was just my gig. And I do remember this is when the first episode of season one, when the episode you're referencing, the Pants Tent, when that aired, I got a message on my machine the next day from a friend of mine, somebody I've known since junior high school, who said, I caught this show on HBO the other night. I forget the name of it, but it would be right up your alley. It's exactly your sense of humor. And in this first episode, this guy's got his pants are making like a thing. It looks like an erection. Anyway, you should see it. If they repeat it, you should watch it. And I called him up and I said, yeah, I know something about that show. I produced it and directed it.
So he's going to hang around for credits more often now.
Yeah, exactly. I guess he tuned out right before the very end. And by the way, Larry's attitude, which I kind of shared, Larry was always flummoxed by the idea of having to do promotion. His actual attitude is, well, why promote it? Why tell people to watch it? Just put it on the air, and if they find it, they find it. And if they don't, they don't. Who cares? But, you don't need ratings. You don't have sponsors. So just let's be under the radar and just let the show go out and not talk about it, not review it or anything. And he really couldn't understand why HBO wanted to get word out about this before it aired.
Well, that begs the other question, which is, it seems that I'm trying to think of a show that I'm aware of where the network, even HBO, which was, very creator and creative friendly with people, but I mean, the network really let you guys do what you wanted to do. Can you imagine? Can you remember a day during the shooting of the first episode where you were getting the quote unquote network notes?
No, and again, remember, this was really my first experience with series television, so, I knew all that went on at the networks. As a matter of fact, I had friends who were running very successful shows at the networks, and when I would talk to them about, how hands-off HBO was, they would start drooling, because, they, no matter how successful the show, they always had to put up with the network notes, and not to mention standards and practices and those executives telling you how to make it funnier and all that, and they couldn't stand it. And when I told them, listen, part of that was HBO, but most of that was about Larry David. And remember, Chris Albrecht was the guy who was there at the time who ordered the special and ordered the series. And Chris used to be Larry's agent at ICM. In fact, when Larry wrote Prognosis Negative, and I read that script, his agent who scheduled his meeting was Chris Albrecht. So Chris was smart enough to know that HBO wanted to get into the Larry David business. And I think it may have been, this is all speculation, but I think it may have been premeditated to the point where when Chris, agreed to do the special, maybe, even though we weren't talking about a series, maybe Chris somewhere in the back of his head said, let's get him hooked with the special, and then we'll hit him up for a series. So Larry was the 800-pound gorilla whom they weren't going to mess with. The guy created Seinfeld. He co-created Seinfeld. No HBO executive is going to try to tell him what to do. And also, if they did, Larry would just either laugh at them or walk away and say, you know what, you do it. You know how to make such a funny show, you do it. He didn't need it. The only reason we did the series was it was going to be fun. It was a lark. Larry didn't need it. He could have walked away at any time. And in fact, I was telling you before that Larry said, if, at the end of the day, this idea stinks, we won't do the special. The other part of that was he had it worked out with HBO that if he did the thing and finished it and then looked at the finished product and didn't like it, he would pay them back for their investment. So Larry, HBO wasn't going to try to give Larry notes. So, no, occasionally somebody would show up on set really just for like a friendly social visit. I remember there was one time somewhere in there, maybe season 2 or 3, where they said, let's try to crack down on this a little bit. I guess because they're network executives and they're bored and they figure they have to do something.
Don't tell me it's Crazy Eyed Killer.
No, I don't remember what episode it was.
Oh.
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't like content notes, but it was more like showing up to make sure that we were sort of shooting this as expeditiously as possible so we wouldn't have, any more days with overtime or, pickups or anything like that. So somebody showed up on set and watched us for the day, and then I think at the end of the day tried to corral Larry and give him a few ideas, and Larry just looked at him and said,
good
"This
luck
conversation is not going to take place. What are you doing? What are you thinking about?" And the guy just sort of, put his tail between his legs and walked away, and that was the end of it. That was the one time I remember HBO trying to act like a network and try to sort of run a tighter ship, and it didn't fly.
One of the things that you're keenly aware of when you watch the episodes, and obviously this was at work in the first episode, is the level of talent that's required on the part of the cast. I was talking with Cheryl Hines about her background in Groundlings, and she said, look, there's just no way that I could have done this show without that background. That's not to say that it was necessary, but I thought it was fascinating that you could see, given the fact that there wasn't a prepared script, how well some of these people have been trained and some of their roots in improv because of the nature of the show. And I was just wondering if, after directing the first episode, if you or Larry thought to said to each other, we have to make sure that we continue down this path, because otherwise people without that kind of training are gonna, it may be too hard.
Well, let's not forget, Larry really doesn't have improv training. I mean, not in any meaningful way. And we actually did have actors on the show without improv training who did great, who were fearful going in that they would screw up, but did a fine job and then came out loving the experience. And that includes Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen. As I recall now, this is going back a few years, so we're relying on my possibly faulty memory. But I seem to recall the two of them being very nervous about their first day. And how do you do this without a script? And it's like, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine. And they were fine, they were great. And then afterwards, I seem to recall them saying, wow, who needs a script? We never want to work with the script again. This is the way to go. They had a great time.
But you would help them along, right? It's not like...
But that's with everybody, no matter their experience. I mean, basically the way the show was made was you would do a take, and I should back up a little bit, is this may be obvious to people or maybe not, is that the actors were not given the outline. They literally would be in the makeup trailer getting made up for the scene, not knowing what was going to happen. Now, what I would always do is I would take a couple minutes and go in and welcome them and make sure that they were comfortable and tell them basically what we were going to do. I mean, tell them basically what the scene was. And I'd also give them a bit of a pep talk, say, I know this seems crazy that you're about to go on camera, you have no idea what's going on, but believe me, it's going to be a breeze, you're going to have a great time. We're going to, give you notes in between the takes. We're going to shoot it several times until we know we've got it. Then we make everybody look great in the editing room. Nobody comes off looking bad on this show. And then you can see the whole body English starts to change as they physically start to relax and get less nervous. So nobody sees an outline going in. They get, just a brief, accounting of what's going to take place in the scene. Now, if there's a specific piece of dialogue that they have to say that, the scene turns on or whatever, then, you put that in their ear beforehand. So if it's, you say, look, okay, you and Larry are both having lunch. And then Larry's lunch comes first. And Larry will say to you, do you mind if I get started? And you say, yes, I do mind. And that's all you tell them. But obviously they have to know that, because that's what the scene is about, is the argument that ensues after that. So if there's a line like that, you put it in their ear. But otherwise, you just let them go. Now, as far as actors having improv background or not, everybody, virtually everybody, unless it's, Ben Stiller or someone like that, who comes on the show, they do audition. All the day players or the featured players for a given episode audition. And instead of being given sides out in the hallway before they come in, instead of being given the scene with dialogue, they're given what we call a premise slip. And when I was on the show full time, I typed these out. It would say, you run into Larry on the street and you try to chat with him, and he, is trying to get out of it, and he walks away, leaving you very confused. That's all that would be on the slip. So they'd have that out in the corridor a few minutes beforehand, and then they'd come in and they'd do it. And whether or not they've had improv experience, if they nailed the audition, great, they can do it. If they don't, if they're flummoxed or whatever. But we saw very few actors of that low a caliber because we did have casting directors who were on the show, including Allison Jones, who's one of the best for comedy. She's been on and off the show. We've had others along the way, but so the casting directors would bring us actors that they thought could handle it.
So 2 questions. One is, how did you know when to stop doing takes of a particular scene? And the second is, given the fact that you had, so many different approaches to a given scene, what was editing like? Because it sounds like there was a lot of material.
Yeah. Well, on the set when you're shooting, you just sort of sense it. And of course, you always go into the huddle afterwards. Larry and I would always have a conversation, and if someone else was directing, they would be there, and Jeff would be there, and we'd always have a conversation about we need a little more. I think it'd be funnier if he got a little angrier at you, or why don't we try one where you're a little more contrite this time and less combative, or whatever. So you would try different things and shoot it a few different ways. And then at some point we'd all look at each other. We got it? Yeah, we got it. Sure. Yeah, let's move on. Or I'd say, hold on, let me just get. There's an angle I'm missing. I want to be able to get his reaction shot to this or whatever. And you'd pick up those shots. But it was basically you could feel it when you had it. And yeah, the editing room was quite. I spent a lot of time in the editing room. That was one of the things that I sort of resented about the show, was that the actors who were on the show, they would come in and work for a few weeks or a couple months or whatever it was, and then they could go off and do other gigs. And people would say to me, so what are you off to? I'd say, what am I off to? I'm going to be in the editing room for the next 7 months. What do you mean, what am I off to? And so the show was most of the calendar year for me. Next to Larry, I was, first one in, last one out, because we spent so much time in the editing room. And by the way, with a scripted show, you have your guide, and this is this guy's best take for this line, and this is her best take for this line, and it's take 3 works good for this part of it or whatever. But here, on top of all of the conventional considerations that go into editing, you've got, well, do we want to go with the take where Larry apologizes to the guy, or should we go with a take where Larry storms off?
Was the editing room a democracy? I mean, did you and Larry decide together?
As specific a comic vision as he has, and as sure of himself as he is in many ways, he's actually a very good collaborator, and he's very open to input. And because he is a performer and a comedian, of course, he is full of self-doubt, too. So he's always worried about whether something works or not, and is very covetous of your input in the process. So now, it wouldn't be a room full of people. It would be just Larry and myself and the editor. And we had this, in fact, the editor who cut the original special in 98, 99 is still with the show. That's Steve Rash. And then there are other editors, who came and went, including John Korn, who's put in a lot of time on the show. But in any event, so it would really be the 3 of us. Now, if it was a show that somebody else directed, if it was Brian Gordon, David Steinberg, whatever, they would sometimes be in the room, or they would do their cut, and then we'd come in and do ours. But no, Larry was always very open. I used to say that when we were doing the special, that Larry and I would be having a conversation about something, and I don't know, is this funny? Should we be going for the laugh? Is this too much of a distraction or whatever? And then, we'd be in there late at night, so it'd be like 10 o'clock at night, and the cleaning guy would come in to, take out the trash from the bin in the room, and something would be playing on the monitor, and we could hear the cleaning guy chuckling as he's, taking out our trash, and Larry would go, oh, well, he thinks it's funny. All right, it can stay. So, he was quite open to input. And, sometimes we would disagree on something, but always find some sort of synthesis between the 2 points of view that would work, not to mention the input from the editor, which was very good because our editors were terrific, and they had their own point of view, too. And sometimes Larry would say, I think we should go with A. I'd say, let's go with B. And the editor would say, well, hold on, I think I can sort of give you the best of both worlds here and put together something that had exactly the qualities we were both looking for, and that would be the solution. So the editing process was intense and very, very time-consuming, but, because Curb was not a written show in the conventional sense. I always said that the writing process started with those outlines. The writing process continued on the set because you're making it up as you're going, so to speak. But the writing process also continued in the editing room as you're shaping the story based on what takes you go with and what performances you go with. You're making narrative decisions in the editing room, not just what shot looks best and what's the best performance, but you're still shaping the story. So it was a unique show that way.
It turns out that 3 of my favorite episodes you directed, which is the Doll, Crazy Eye Killer, and Palestinian Chicken.
So, if I were a comedian, I'd say, what, you didn't like the carpool lane?
Right, exactly.
You find the thing they don't compliment, you obsess on that.
What about Thor? In one of those episodes, if there was a scene that you could take us inside it for a moment and just give us a little sense of what goes on in your head while you're shooting a scene, that would be great.
Well, let's see. I don't know if this is exactly what you're looking for, but this does go back to the idea of how prepared the actors are or aren't, and Larry and I having sometimes 2 different points of view about how something should be approached. The Crazy Eyes Killer episode, which I'm going to say was season 3, maybe. By the way, I would now lose.
It was.
Was it? Okay. I would now lose a Curb trivia contest to a real Curb fanatic. My memory used to be very, very sharp on all this, but as more and more episodes came and the years went by and I've been away from the show, I still come back and direct, but I've been away from my full-time services for a while now, so it's all getting a bit fuzzy, and there are Curb fanatics who know more details than I do at this point. But in any event, so Crazy Eyes Killer was season 3. Now this guy comes in, Chris Williams, who came in to the audition in character. He didn't call himself Crazy Eyes Killer. I think he called himself the Wolf. And he had these teeth that were sharpened into fangs, these kind of fake teeth. But he came in fully in character, and we really thought that was him. That was the guy. We thought, well, that's great. He doesn't even have to act. I mean, he's exactly. And then our casting director said, no, that's an act. That's not who he is. So, in any event, and then it winds up. He's Chris Williams. He is Vanessa Williams' brother, and I used to be very friendly with Vanessa Williams. So I called him up and congratulated him. I said, hey, tell your sister I said hello and all that. So in any event, we had the scene in that show where, now this was in the outline, was simply that Crazy Eyes is at his engagement party with Wanda, and Larry is there. And Crazy Eyes wants to run some rap lyrics that he wrote by Larry.
It's so great.
Yeah. And, for Larry's comments. Now, I did something behind Larry's back, which I rarely did. I mean, I would do things behind his back if I, not in a serious, not in a, what's the word I want, in a disloyal way. But if I really thought it would help the show, something to surprise Larry, I would, work on something that he didn't know about just so I could get a real reaction from him. But this was one of the few times where I did something that I knew he wouldn't want me to do, but I knew it was the right thing to do. As I thought, it's unfair for Chris to show up on set that day and say, okay, we're going to do a scene where you're going to run some lyrics by Larry that you're working on. Because I thought Chris would say, well, I'm supposed to, I'm not a real rapper. How am I supposed to just come up with lyrics? So I called him up the night before, and I told him what the scene was. And I'm sure Larry's not going to listen to this podcast because I was going to say, until this moment, Larry has no idea I did this.
Oh,
but even
thanks a lot.
A year from now, he won't know. And I said, just prepare something. And it should be dirty, and it should be violent, and sort of like the last thing that some bald middle-aged Jewish guy is going to have anything to add to or to any revisions to give you, but just make it dirty and make it violent, and you're going to kill somebody for disrespecting you.
But wait, though, it's on a piece of paper, though. He actually takes out a piece of paper. Didn't Larry get suspicious?
I don't know, because Larry's reaction was, it wasn't like it was a terrible thing, well, Larry can't find this out. I just wanted Chris to be prepared.
No, I'm just saying, though, right after the first take or something, because he takes out a piece of paper and maybe he's not reading it, but it seemed like he was reading it. Yeah.
No, he's reading it, but by that point, Larry's already into the scene and he's into character and he's going with it. So he's not stopping and saying, whoa, what's going on here? Because it's working.
Right.
He's reading this thing and it's brilliant.
Oh, I just meant like that day or that night or something to say to you, like, how did he know how to have that written down?
No, he never put two and two together. Larry's not all that bright. He's smart on the show, but
I think he's so bright that he actually knew that you tipped him off in advance, which is why he had it. But that's
maybe. And he wasn't going to approach me and say, that was the right thing to do.
Right.
No, it was a moment that just came and went. It was really no big deal.
Wasn't that when he takes out the second bitch?
Says, yeah. Larry says, you already said bitch once. I would or you already said motherfucker once. You don't need to say it again. I would go with bitch.
Add the bitch. Right. Right.
So anyway, that was a little behind-the-scenes moment on that show.
Yeah, that's great. In terms of your own career and your work with comedy, how has it informed your view of your own work and of comedy in general? How does it relate to your own education, your own development?
I'm sort of grateful for the fact that when in the early days of the show, none of us took what we were doing very seriously or thought, we're doing something groundbreaking here, or this has never been done before, this is revolutionary. There was none of that kind of thinking. It was just about making the show, making our day. I didn't really care if people watched the show or not. Larry didn't care if people watched the show or not. We were just having fun. And it was just about the practicalities of doing the show and the schedule and the way we were shooting it and the way we were cutting it together. We were hoping that maybe some of our friends would be amused by it. So we never really thought in terms of the show catching on or how many people would watch it. And it was interesting during the first season of the show. My contention is that when you're in the middle of making something, a series like this that's already starting to air, you're sort of living in a bubble of making the show because people are already watching the first few episodes while you're still editing the last few. So you don't really know how it's reaching people or what people are making of it. And it was interesting partway through, maybe not even the first season, but the second season, starting to meet Curb fans who would find out what I would do for a living or whatever. Say, oh, my God, I love that show. I go, really? You watch it? I would be sort of surprised. I remember being in a deli once, and there was an old Jewish couple across the aisle from, I think it was Ohio. And I think I had on my jacket that said Curb Your Enthusiasm on it. It's like a crew jacket. Oh, my God, we love that show. I said, you live in Ohio and you watch it? So, there's something to be said for not thinking about the audience or not thinking about the success and just doing what you want to do. And, again, if you can get out of a network situation where you're doing what they want you to do, just sort of staying true to your own voice and not having the investment of how many people are watching and caring about it. And if people want to tune in, they will. And if it catches on, it does. So, I don't know. To me, it was it's a little hard to stand outside of it and think about the impact that the show has had on anybody. For me, it was just a great gig for a great number of years. And look, Albert Brooks did Real Life back in I don't know what that was, maybe 78 or 79 or something. That was like a faux documentary. Rob Reiner took it to the next step with Spinal Tap and made a faux documentary, comedy documentary that was mostly improvised. So that had been done. And Chris Guest may have done his first movie by then that sort of did the same thing. And I guess what we did was we were the first ones to sort of, to shoot an improvised, show for an actual series. And that's it. I think if Curb has succeeded, a lot of it had to do with the fact that, again, it was my first TV series. Larry didn't care. It was very loosey-goosey. There was no pressure. And, we were doing something that really hadn't been done before, so we weren't thinking about breaking the rules. We were just, trying to make the show. And I think Seinfeld succeeded to a great degree because of the fact that Larry didn't know the rules of sitcom writing. I mean, the guys at Castle Rock and at NBC, were often saying, well, this isn't why, George and Jerry should be different. They're too much alike. You can't get the conflict that you want out of the narrative. They're too similar. And Larry would say, well, why would two people who are so different hang out with each other? Why would they be friends? Aren't you friends with people who think like you do? And he'd be thinking in terms of real life, not in terms of how to make a sitcom. And I think that's one of the reasons Seinfeld succeeded. And I guess to a certain degree, Curb succeeded for the same reasons, as we didn't know what we were doing.
Oh, that's perfect. Bob, I cannot thank you enough. It's been wonderful.
Well, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this Origins original. Please be sure to subscribe to Origins for new chapters every month, along with other Origins originals and Origins conversations. Thanks so much. For Origins, I'm Jim Miller.